Today I'm going to be reviewing Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I just finished this book this morning around an hour or two ago, and I've got things to say. This review will be following the same format as last time, where I give you my overall impressions and then I jump into Goodreads to react to the reviews on that website. And of course there will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't read Fourth Wing yet and it's on your list to read, I'd recommend reading it first and then coming back to watch this video. I went into this book thinking it was fantasy, but it's definitely more of a romantasy, and that's going to play into my thoughts on this book a lot. Start with the things I loved about this book. I loved the dragons. I loved learning about the different types of dragons and their characteristics. Probably my favorite part of this book. The other thing I really liked about this book was the pacing. Going into this book, I knew this was the first book in a series, but I read this book with the intention that I might just read it as a standalone. As I started reading this book, I started getting nervous that it wouldn't get to the threshing in terms of what dragon the main character bonds with. I was very pleasantly surprised that that happened in the first half of the book. So I liked that a lot of things happened in this book. It didn't drag things out to be revealed in the next book in the series. The other thing that I really liked about this book is that the author leaves a lot of different nuggets for you to be able to figure things out yourself. I love that about a book, and a lot of the things I did see coming. There were a few surprises for me, but I liked there being a reveal and me thinking, oh yeah, there were clues about that. I was flipping back a lot in this book just to read different passages and to see if I could find the clues. I think those were the three main things I loved about this book. There were things I didn't really like about this book, didn't really connect with a lot of the characters. That's not to say that I disliked any of the characters except one. I really had an aversion towards Dane right from the start. It took me a long time to warm up to Violet, who is the main character in this book. I did like Xaden. I also really liked Rhiannon. So there were characters that I liked, but I didn't feel that invested in the characters, even though I was really invested in the story and in the plot. I wanted to see what would happen next. The main thing I didn't like about this book was the romance. I'm not that into romance. I was really hoping there wouldn't be a love triangle. There was a little bit at the beginning, but it was nipped in the bud pretty quickly, which was good for me. I liked the chemistry between Violet and Xaden, but I just felt like it was a bit too much. It was too much romance for me. I would have preferred more fantasy, more history, more world building. I would have liked to know more of the backstory of some of the main characters. For example, I would have loved to know much more of Xaden's backstory. Maybe that will come in subsequent books. There were a few spicy scenes, and I don't mind spicy scenes when they contribute something to the book. The first spicy scene was fine, tied in nicely with the dragons and how they have this primal lust for each other and how that manifested in their bonded humans. So I liked that a lot. But the next spicy scenes I felt were really dragged out. I didn't think they contributed a whole lot to the story or to the relationship, because I was like, oh, these two are just hot for each other, and I get that they're young, they're lusty. There was a really long build up to the spicy scenes, but I was like, okay, can we please get on with the story? That was a pretty big drawback for me in terms of this book. And before I go into Goodreads, I want to give you my star rating for this book. I would have to give this book a 3.5. Rounded for Goodreads, I would give it a 4. If this book was more heavy on fantasy, more heavy on world building, and less so on the romance, I would have given it a much higher score, because I did enjoy this book. I always wanted to read it. I was excited to know what would happen next, and I felt the feels during this book, even though I didn't connect that deeply with the characters. I did feel the characters were a little bit one-dimensional and their reactions were a little bit repetitive. For example, Dane was always by the book, always concerned about Violet's safety, always wanting her to leave the Rider Quadrant and just not believing in her. And I was like, okay, I get it. I understand this part of these characters' personalities. Now please show me something else. And the something else never really arrived. So those were my overall impressions of the book. And now let's jump into Goodreads. Here we are once again in Goodreads. I'm gonna go ahead and type in the name of the book. This book got a very high star rating on Goodreads, 4.58. And looking at the breakdown of the star reviews, many people gave it 5 stars. Before we jump into the reviews themselves, I want to take a look at the genre. And it is romantasy, enemies to lovers, yes. Magic. I loved the magic components as well. Yeah, more magic, more dragons, more world building, more character development. I think more of those elements would have made me love this book. Let's now use the filters to pull the newest reviews in English. I'm recording this on April 15th at around 10 a.m. and I'm gonna start again with 5 stars. This is a review by Kevin, and it's quite a long review. Buckle up, fantasy lovers. Fourth Wing is a wild, fiery ride that absolutely soars. From the first page, Rebecca Yarros grabs you by the collar and drags you into a deadly, dragon-filled world where only the bold survive. And even then, barely. This isn't your typical fantasy fare. It's brutal, sexy, and smart, with stakes so high they'll leave your heart pounding and your Kindle clutched in a death grip at 2 a.m. The protagonist, Violet Sorengale, is an unforgettable force of nature. She's thrown into the brutal world of Bagsgiath War College, where cadets either bond with a dragon or die trying. Violet is not your average chosen one. She's smaller, weaker, and constantly underestimated. But her sharp mind, unwavering resilience, and fierce heart make her a heroine you'll root for with everything you've got. And the dragons. Holy hell, the dragons. They're majestic, terrifying, and brimming with personality. The bond system is chef's kiss brilliant. Add in sizzling enemies to lovers tension with a dark and brooding wing leader, hello Xaden, and you've got a book that practically ignites in your hands. The pacing never lets up. Every chapter ends with a punch to the gut, a gasp-worthy twist, or a drop of pure adrenaline. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll scream at the pages, and when it's over, you'll be desperate for book 2. Fourth Wing is a genre-defying, absolutely unput-downable fantasy romance that deserves every ounce of hype it's getting. 5 blazing stars and a million fire-breathing hearts. If you haven't read it yet, what are you waiting for? The dragons are calling. What a delightful review to start off with. There's a lot I would agree with in this review. I did find this to be a page turner. I read it very quickly. I loved the dragons. I want to bond with a dragon. Even though I don't tend to love romance, the enemies to lovers tension I thought was done pretty well. It wasn't annoying, even though I did find Xaden to be a bit one-dimensional in his reactions to things, especially at the beginning. He would sneer a lot, he would smirk a lot, and he would just have like this really intense look in his eyes, like he wanted to kill Violet, the main character. So that was repeated quite a bit at the beginning of this book, but as their relationship developed and as Xaden started showing signs that he was intrigued by Violet, that he cared about Violet, then the chemistry got pretty intense. I would say the middle part of the book, where we're introduced to the dragons, up until I would say the really long spicy scene, I think it was like the second spicy scene, but it went on for pages and pages and pages. That chunk of the book, that was my favorite part of the book. I've talked before about how I really love smart characters, and Violet is supposed to be a smart and cunning character, the most intelligent person in her year, and I don't know if I got enough of that intelligence. I wish there had been more about that, more of her intelligence revealed, more of her piecing things together. It took me a long time to connect with this character. If I had to pinpoint when I started changing my mind about this character, it would probably be around the time that she protected the Feathertail. So again, it was right around the time where we meet the dragons. That's where everything kind of clicked into place for me, and I started really enjoying this book. I think I read that this is planned to be a 5-book series all in. Books 2 and 3 are out, but I don't know if I'm going to read them. I did enjoy the first book, and it does end in a kind of cliffhanger, but I'm not actually that keen to read books 2 and 3 just yet. I'm gonna take a break and see if I want to read them down the road, if I'm curious about what will continue to unfold in this story. While I agree with a lot in this review, review, the reviewer definitely enjoyed this book a lot more than I did. The second review is from Haley, 5 stars, I love dragons. And as the previous reviewer mentioned, the bonding element was a very clever way for us to get to know the dragons and their personalities, because when a rider bonds with a dragon, they can essentially talk to each other telepathically. The 2 dragons that Violet ended up bonding with, both of them had unique personalities. Terran is a strong, curmudgeon-y dragon, a lot of sarcasm, and I really loved the way they interacted. And then the other dragon that Violet bonded with, the Feathertail, she just had a really sweet personality, very warm, compassionate, and caring, very innocent because she is a young dragon. I would have loved if there was more dragon in this book. The last review I'll read in the 5-star category is by Brooke. Finally, a fully well-written, deep-layered, very well thought-out book series. A heroine imperfect and finding her own path amidst multiple obstacles. Highly recommend. Even though I didn't connect with the main character early on, I did like that she had more mental fortitude than she has physical strength. I didn't really love how often she needed to be rescued. It was always Dane rescuing her, or Xaden rescuing her, or her dragon rescuing her. I liked that she used poison to weaken some of her opponents, but I didn't like that she wouldn't go in for the kill. Of course, that is her character. She is very compassionate. She doesn't want to hurt people. So I get that that is part of her character, but I found it really frustrating because I thought, you know what? If you are so intelligent and you have this cunning where I would assume you would think many steps ahead, then ending your enemies, the ones that will inevitably cause more hurt and more damage and perhaps harm to your friends, I felt like she should have gone in for the kill. But that's just me and how I would prefer a character to deal with the situation. And I get that her showing mercy to her enemies was part of her personality. I spent a long time on 5-star reviews, so let's see what we have for 4 stars. Here's a review from Jill. Initially put off by dragons, but mostly got over it. I loved how the action carried the plot. It never got boring and didn't seem as long as it was. Didn't love the spice level and wish I could have gotten a better grasp and familiarity with their world. Overall, I agree with this review, except I was not put off by the dragons at all. This was quite a thick book and I flew through it, and I definitely wish there were more pages dedicated to world building and more backstory as well, more of the history of how these characters came to be. Coda starts off the review by giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I would have rated this 5 stars if I didn't spend the first 40% of the book annoyed by Violet. She did have a comeback though, and I now like her a lot more than I did at first. As for Xaden, he can get it anytime, anywhere. The story was so good and the ending was shocking, immediately picking up the next book. I felt the same way about Violet as we just discussed. And as for Xaden, even though he was written to be quite a sneery, smirky character, I did find that there was a certain appeal to him. The ending for me wasn't that shocking, maybe because as I'm reading a book, a lot of thoughts come up for me. The possibility of the ending was already swirling around in my mind. And as soon as we got to the part where Violet was slipping in and out of consciousness and heard a familiar voice, I was like, okay, Brennan is still alive. That was the major twist and cliffhanger at the end because we see that he's alive and then the book ends. Let's read one more 4-star review. This one's from Caitlin. 3.9 out of 5. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not very into fantasy, but this book was solid. It was easy to read, but also it was insanely cringy at times. I feel like I need to read it all over again because now I actually understand their world and what all those random words/names mean. Lots of F-bombs. Way too detailed spice. I skipped 10 pages. I want to read the others in the series because the book ended on such a cliffhanger, but I don't know if I can. Someone tell me if it's worth reading the next 2 books, please. I feel very similarly, and it was a bit cringy at times. I felt the cringe, especially with some of the dialogue during the spicy scenes, and I found the end scene a bit cringy as well when Xaden was professing his love for Violet. It just seemed very over the top to me. I didn't notice the swearing that much. I know there is definitely swearing in the book, but it didn't seem excessive to me. Now let's jump to the 3-star reviews, and this one's by It's Reading Time. At first, when I read it for the first time, I loved it, but after a while I realized that it wasn't all that. Yes, it's an enjoyable read, but the world building could have been much epic. I agree. I was so excited about this book in the middle section. I couldn't wait to learn more about what was going on in terms of a lot of the substantive things, like what was happening at the borders, and I wanted to learn more about this king and their system of government. There was a lot that I wanted to know as we entered into the last part of the book, probably the last third of the book. And basically we got long spice scenes, the two main characters being really hot for each other, and a pretty epic battle scene, the twist and the cliffhanger at the end where we got a little bit more information, but it wasn't enough to leave me feeling very satisfied. Next, let's take a look at this review by Ellie. 3.5 stars. I enjoyed the book for what it is. I don't think it is objectively good, but it is a fun read. It definitely reads very Wattpad-y and fanfic sometimes, but I think it is still enjoyable. Definitely some lines where I rolled my eyes. Not life-changing, but a fun read if you don't take it super seriously. I think my biggest complaint is that while it is fantasy, nothing from the dialogue would ever give you that impression. Everyone talks and acts like people from 2025, which is fine, but it just takes me out of the world a bit. Rhiannon and Riddick are the best characters. I'll probably read the rest of them since I'm getting it from the library, but if I had to pay for it, I probably wouldn't. I agree with a lot of this review. I've never read anything on Wattpad, and I don't think I've ever read any fan fiction, so I can't speak to that comparison. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book, but I enjoyed elements of it. I liked the Riddick character as well, and what I've realized about myself recently is that I really enjoy funny books. Not necessarily books that are meant to be funny, but I enjoy funny, playful, lighthearted elements in books. And again, the middle of this book, from the time where Violet bonded with her dragon, I found a lot of humorous bits in that exchange, and I just found that whole interaction, that whole bonding process, and where she is getting to know her dragon, just found it really delightful. Let's read one more 3-star review from Amber. I don't know why these characters are so immature. Right off the bat, they hate each other despite never meeting one another. The whole reason they can't stand each other is because their parents hated each other. Why can't they think for themselves? Over half of the book is them hating each other. That's it. The plot for over half is some weird twist on enemies to lovers, but the enemies part is stupid. And the lovers part has weirdly unemotional sex that somehow leads to them falling for each other. This is an interesting review because when I read this review, I'm actually surprised that the reviewer gave it 3 stars. This sounds almost like a 1 or a 2-star review. I can sort of understand why the characters are immature. They are very young. So the main character, Violet, is 20, and we find out later that Xaden is 23. And I kind of understand the dynamic between the two main characters, Violet and Xaden, and the so-called hate they have for each other. It's of course perceived hate because they don't actually hate each other from the very beginning. I think Violet has been conditioned to be fearful of Xaden, and she has it in her mind that Xaden wants to kill her. So she has this impression of him, but she still feels drawn to him. Her body is very drawn to him, as we read over and over and over again. But she definitely doesn't hate him. They have kind of an antagonistic relationship. It is very enemies to lovers type of vibe, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they hated each other from the jump, although we are led to believe that. As the story unfolds, we actually learn that they didn't hate each other. They were actually literally both attracted to each other. I will say that I kind of agree with the last line. They are very physically attracted to each other. They have a lot of lust for one another, but I feel like their connection, their chemistry was mostly physical. The author spent a lot of time on the physical part of their attraction and not nearly as much time on the emotional part. So I think I would have liked to see more balance there, and the relationship I think would have been a lot more believable and a lot stronger as well in my mind. Let's go to 2-star reviews. And here we have a review by Sev. I'm glad this is over. In my opinion, the world building was lazy and most of the world didn't make much logical sense. The characters were lazy and had no real growth or personalities beyond big shadow power man and small, teeny tiny light power girl. And they really like to Oh, but she's not allowed to fall in love with him at all, of course. The romance was, not gonna lie, mid and kind of boring. Even the side characters were boring. Nobody had any real personalities beyond caricatures that had no real depth. This book also kind of reads like every single trope thrown together like a bad isekai anime. It's like it was written just as an excuse for Rebecca Yarros to throw all of her favorite tropes in at once, but it wasn't executed well at all. All of these tropes are present in so many other fantasy novels that are better written and have better characters overall. Also, for a book about dragon riding, the dragons are nowhere near cool enough as an intelligent and ancient species, which is unfortunate because I do really love dragons. Yeah, this review is harsh, but I can see some truth in it. There are a lot of tropes in this book, and I don't mind. I mean, all books have tropes within them. And as I mentioned, even though there are characters that I like, there weren't any human characters that I loved. I did love the dragon characters, and I would have liked to see more of the dragons, more of their intelligence, more of their cunning, more of their ruthlessness. So even though this review is quite harsh, I would tend to agree with a lot of the points in it. I will say I probably enjoyed this book way more than this reviewer did. Let's continue with the next review by Dida. Seriously terrible. Doesn't do fantasy or romance well. Dragons were the only cool part. I don't read a lot of romance, so I can't say whether this is a good romance book, but I feel like the fantasy elements weren't bad at all. I really enjoyed the fantasy elements, and I think if it had been more fantasy than romance, I would have loved this book. And of course, yeah, the dragons were awesome. Okay, let's read one more by Ainzel. This shit was so the beginning made me feel like I tripped on a rock and woke up in 2014 as a bullied protagonist of a Wattpad fan fiction, and honestly, that was the peak of this entire book. We have another comparison to Wattpad and fan fiction. I'm not sure what to say about this review. It's not really bringing up any thoughts for me, but it's very clear that this reader did not like the book. Okay, let's go to 1 star. I feel like I've already read a few 1-star reviews that were in the other categories. Kind of nervous about this. Okay, the first review is just bad. That's not too bad. Okay, here we go with Brooke's review. This is a long review, so I'm going to end with this one. All right, strap the in because I have things to say about this. After a major case of FOMO and subsequently conforming to the era of book talk, I can safely say that this is book What a way to start. I didn't realize this book was popular on Book Talk. Literally felt like about a month ago, I could not listen or follow any pop culture without this series coming up. Not even my favorite podcasts were safe, so here we are. I high-key can already feel that this is going to be the longest review in history, but I'm writing from my desk and felt as bored as I did while reading this, so I thought I would deliver the content to the masses and dispel this conception that this is a groundbreaking read. Firstly, it took me ages to get through this. Genuinely would go to read in bed and fall asleep after a 1% progression. Like me, it took about 70% of the book for something to actually happen. It's low-key giving Divergent vibes with the different factions or whatever the call them. And let me just say that quotes like, "Is it toxic that I like this guy even though he could kill me?" Like, yes girl, yes it is. But also, who speaks like this? Like, aren't you in a medieval castle? Or is this current? I'm so confused. So after about 400 pages, they introduce a war which is literally so vague despite being the only sort of real story arc other than the enemies to lovers copy and pasted. Like, where is the plot for such a long book? The main character has literal no development. I don't know a single thing about her from her inner monologue other than she finds the lead male hot and mysterious and she thinks he wants to kill her. Like, okay girl. And that she is tiny, which was only used as the descriptor for her 170,000 times. One redeeming quality of this book is the disability representation. I felt like the training arc was cool where she didn't automatically become better than everyone else after 2 weeks of training, but had to use what she had to outsmart people. Kind of cool, but that's all it had going for it in my opinion. Also, sidebar, they went from hating each other to can't live without you status in like 2 conversations. I think I've officially graduated from being influenced by TikTok ever again. The smallest part of me wants to continue the series re-surrounding hype, like, is it gonna get better? But also, WTF, absolutely not. I am done. There are many phrases in this review that I don't think I've ever said out loud before, so this was a fun review to read. Where to begin? I did have thoughts jump into my mind when I was reading this review. Let me scroll back and take a look. I don't follow a lot of social media, so I haven't actually heard a lot of buzz about this book. I know it was released quite a number of years ago, but I think the 3rd book was just released earlier this year, which may be why there is hype surrounding this series again. I did not find this book boring, but it was more of an escapism book for me. It was entertaining, but my mind didn't really go beyond that. We did know about the war from the very beginning, and the book was primarily set in a military college. So the war was, at least for me, when I was reading this book, it was ever present. It was part of the story itself. The last part of this review about the main character and the character development, I do understand what the reviewer is getting at here. There is a lot of repetition, a lot of driving home similar points. In terms of the disability representation, I did a quick Google search because this did not jump out at me at all, and it looks like the main character Violet has a condition called EDS, although this isn't explicitly stated in the book. So I think that is what the reviewer is referring to. I don't know a whole lot about EDS, so I'm definitely going to read up a bit more about that once I am done recording this video. If you've read Fourth Wing, please let me know down below what you thought of the book. That's going to be it for today. Thank you all so much for watching this review. I'll see you again very soon in another video. Until then, please take care and bye for now.